The woman standing next to Adam Calder in the Portland ballroom had told him this was a company party. She had not told him what the company was. A man in a tailored jacket crossed the floor, extended his hand, and said, "Ms. Kessler, the board loved the waterfront proposal. 200 million committed before Q3. Adam's fingers tightened around his glass. Julia glanced at him. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She held his gaze the way someone holds a door open, not to invite, but to see if the other person will walk through. 3 days ago, he had been kneeling on her rental cabin deck in Bend, Oregon, tightening a loose railing with a socket wrench. This weekend changed everything for both of them. Stay, because the story of how they got here, and where it goes from here, is worth every minute. Ben sat on the eastern edge of the Cascades, a town built on timber money and outdoor gear, and the kind of quiet that either healed a person or buried them. Adam Calder had lived there for 2 years, and he still had not figured out which one it was doing to him. He ran a one-man contracting operation out of a workshop behind his house, a 1,200-square-foot ranch off Century Drive, with a gravel driveway and a view of the river through the pines. The truck was a 2009 Ford Ranger with a dented tailgate. The work was small: deck repairs, drywall patches, kitchen faucets. He did each job the same way, measured twice, leveled everything, left the site cleaner than he found it. Ben was 10. He had his mother's jaw and his father's hands. Wide palms, square fingers, already calloused from carrying lumber on weekends. Saturday mornings, he stood at the truck bed and handed Adam tools in the right order without being asked. When Adam said 3/8, Ben already had the socket in his palm. They worked that way. No wasted motion, no wasted words. Jean Calder stopped by around 10 with groceries. She was 64, retired from teaching 6th grade, and she had the specific talent of asking questions without actually asking them. She set the bag on the counter, looked at the calendar on the wall, blank for the 3rd straight month, and said, "You used to go places." Adam said, "I go to the hardware store." Jean did not push it. Before Bend, Adam had been a lead structural engineer at Grayfield Associates in Portland, 11 years designing foundation systems for mid-rise buildings across the Pacific Northwest. In 2022, Meg died. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. He took bereavement leave. While he was gone, Grayfield restructured its civil division and eliminated his position. The letter arrived 6 weeks after the funeral. He read it at the kitchen table, set it down, and did not pick it up again. He moved Ben to Bend that summer. His PE license was still active. He just did not use it for anything that required it. Julia Kessler arrived in Bend on a Wednesday, rented a cabin on the east side of town through an online listing, no name attached. She was scouting a lakeside parcel for a resort development, and she had come alone. No assistant, no site team, just a rental car and a pair of boots that still had the tags on them. The cabin's deck railing was loose. 2 balusters had pulled free, and the whole section wobbled. She called the property manager, who gave her Adam's number. He showed up at 4 with his toolbox and a piece of replacement cedar. He reseated the balusters, replaced a split section of the bottom rail, sanded the joint flush, and sealed it. 38 minutes. When he finished, he tested it with both hands. Solid. They talked on the deck afterward. She asked about Bend, what the winters were like, where to get coffee. He told her. She asked if he had family here. He said he had a son. She did not ask about a wife. They crossed paths again at the hardware store on Franklin. She was standing at the bed of her rental truck with a topographic map spread across the tailgate. She looked up and said, "Do you know anything about drainage on the east side of the lake?" He knew quite a lot about drainage. He told her the basics and left the rest out. Over coffee on Thursday, she mentioned a weekend event in Portland, a gala, industry people. Her +1 had canceled. She said it without pressure, almost like she was talking to herself. Then she looked at him and said, "Would you want to come?" Adam said no. He had been. He had not done anything like that in years. Julia nodded. She wrote her number on the back of a receipt and slid it across the table. "In case you change your mind." Her handwriting was small and clear, every digit legible. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket. Adam called her Friday morning at 7. Jean had offered to keep Ben for the weekend before he even asked, which meant she had seen something in his face the night before that he had not seen in the mirror. He said, "I'll come, but I don't have a suit." She said, "Business formal." But nobody actually checks. He borrowed one from his neighbor Dale, a charcoal 2-button that was a size too wide in the shoulders. Ben leaned in the bathroom doorway and watched Adam adjust the collar 3 times in the mirror. Adam looked at his son and said, "I'll be back Sunday night." Ben said, "Okay." That was enough. He drove the Ranger to Portland, 2.5 hours on Route 97 to Highway 26, the landscape shifting from high desert to forest so gradually the change only registered when the air came through the window colder and wetter. Julia had texted him the hotel address and a note. 2nd floor ballroom, 8 o'clock. The venue was a renovated warehouse in the Pearl District. Exposed brick, steel beams, pendant lights, the kind of space that used to store grain and now stored people with 7-figure portfolios. Adam walked through the entrance and understood within 4 seconds that this was not a friend's party. This was a corporate event. The room moved in clusters that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with capital. Julia met him near the bar. She looked at the borrowed suit and said nothing about the shoulders. She introduced him to 3 people in quick succession. First name only. This is Adam. No title, no context. Nobody asked what he did. In rooms like this, if you arrived with the host, the assumption did the work for you. Neil Carver found them within 20 minutes. He was 52, silver at the temples, and he wore his suit the way some men wore authority, draped over the shoulders, meant to be noticed. He shook Adam's hand with a grip that measured something. He looked at Julia and said, "New hire?" Julia did not answer. She turned to the bartender and ordered a club soda. Neil watched Adam for a beat longer than necessary, the kind of look that catalogs a person and files them under irrelevant before the handshake is over. Adam excused himself and took a wrong turn down a side corridor. That was when he saw the display. 3 architectural renderings on easels under gallery lighting. The Halston Tower, a 12-story mixed-use development proposed for the Pearl District. He stopped. He stopped because of the site address in the lower left corner. He knew that address. He knew the soil under it. In 2020, his team at Grayfield Associates had performed the geotechnical assessment for that exact parcel. He had written the report. His name was on page 1. The foundation specs on the display boards did not match what he remembered. The pile depth was shallower. The soil-bearing capacity was higher, not by a small margin, but by a margin that changed the entire engineering basis. Someone had altered the numbers. He stood in front of the display for a long time, his hands at his sides, reading the specifications the way a doctor reads a chart and sees the diagnosis before anyone else in the room. But this was only the beginning. What Adam found in those numbers would unravel something far bigger than a weekend gala, and what it would cost both of them was something neither could have predicted. Adam found Julia near the auction tables and asked about the Halston Tower the way a person asks about the weather. Light, sideways, nothing behind it. She said it was Neil's project. The board had approved it 8 months ago. Groundbreaking was scheduled for spring. She said it the way CEOs talk about initiatives that belong to someone else's portfolio. Informed but unattached, the verbal equivalent of a signature on a routing form. He did not push. He watched Neil work the room instead, moving from cluster to cluster with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where the money was and what it wanted to hear. Neil talked about Halston the way a man talks about a house he has already bought. Present tense, possessive, no room for contingency. Later, Neil pulled Julia aside near the coat check. Adam was close enough to hear fragments. Neil wanted her to announce the Halston construction timeline at Sunday's closing brunch. A public commitment, investor-facing, on the record. Julia hesitated. She said she had not reviewed the final geotechnical sign-off herself. Neil said, "It's done. Everything's filed." His voice carried the particular smoothness of a sentence that had been rehearsed. Julia said nothing. She turned back to the room, and Neil watched her go with an expression that was not quite irritation and not quite satisfaction. Something in between, the look of a man who had been managing upward for so long that the distinction between advising and overriding had stopped meaning anything to him. Adam stepped onto the terrace alone. The air was cold and wet, the way Portland gets in late October when the marine layer comes in and does not leave. He pulled out his phone and opened the Grayfield project archive. His login still worked. PE licenses carried file access rights for liability periods, and his had never been revoked. He found the original 2020 assessment in under a minute. His name was on the cover sheet, the signature block, the certification page. He scrolled to the soil-bearing capacity table on page 12. The values were 30% lower than the numbers on the display boards inside the ballroom. 30% was not a rounding difference. 30% was a different building. He closed the phone. He stood at the terrace railing with both hands flat on the metal and looked at the city without seeing it. The railing was solid under his palms, cold steel, well anchored. He thought about the one he had fixed on Julia's cabin deck 3 days ago. Same instinct both times. You test a railing because you need to know if the thing holding you up is actually holding. Saturday morning, Julia took him through the Pearl District on foot. She wanted to show him the Halston site, not the renderings, the actual block. They stood across the street and looked at an empty lot behind a chain-link fence, weeds pushing through cracked concrete where a parking structure used to be. She talked about what the building could mean. Street-level retail for local businesses, not chains. A public courtyard open to the neighborhood. Affordable units on the upper floors, real affordable, written into the covenant. She talked about it the way someone talks about something they believe in but have not yet been able to control. Adam listened. Then he asked questions. What pile type was specified? What the load path looked like through the transfer slab? Whether anyone had addressed subgrade drainage on the east side, where the water table sat higher than the topo sheet suggested. Julia stopped walking. She looked at him, not suspicious, but alert. Those are specific questions for a handyman. He said, I read a lot. She let it go. But something shifted behind her expression, not doubt, exactly. Attention. The kind of attention a person gives when the shape of a conversation stops matching the shape of the person they thought they were having it with. They sat in a cafe near the Willamette that afternoon. The place was small, brick walls, tin ceiling, the kind of Portland coffee shop that had been there long enough to stop trying. Julia wrapped both hands around her mug and asked about Meg. Adam gave her 3 sentences. They had met in college. She was a biologist. She died in 2022. He said it flat, the way a person recites facts that have been facts long enough to wear down to something dull and permanent. Julia told him she had taken over Kessler Development from her father at 29 after his stroke. The board had expected her to be interim. She had spent 5 years proving that interim was not the right word. She said, every room I walk into, someone is calculating whether I earned it or inherited it. After a while, you stop trying to answer the question and just do the work. Neither of them used the word date. But the distance between their chairs had closed by half since they sat down, and neither of them moved back. Saturday evening was a smaller event. A private dinner at the hotel, investors and board members, 40 people in a room designed for 30. Julia was seated at the head table with 2 board members and the general counsel. Adam was placed at a side table near the service entrance, between a regional sales director and an empty chair. The seating chart had Neil Carver's initials on the approval line. Adam did not mind the table. He minded the pattern. Someone had put the CEO at the front and her guest at the back, and the distance between those 2 positions was not about square footage. It was about control, who belonged in the frame and who had been placed outside it. He ate without tasting the food. The sales director beside him talked about quarterly targets. Adam nodded at the right intervals and watched the room. He watched Neil move between tables, pouring wine for investors he had not introduced to Julia, leaning in close enough to signal ownership of relationships that, on paper, belonged to the CEO. Halfway through the second course, he noticed a cluster of people leaving through a side door. 5 investors, Neil, and 2 associates carrying presentation binders. Nobody announced where they were going. Julia's name was not on any of the binders. The side door closed behind them without a sound. Adam set down his fork. He crossed the room without hurrying, leaned close to Julia's chair, and said, quietly, Neil just took 5 investors upstairs. Conference room. They had binders. Julia's hand paused on her water glass. She studied Adam's face for a beat, long enough to confirm he was not guessing, then excused herself from the table without rushing and walked to the elevator. Adam followed. They found the conference room at the end of the 3rd-floor hall. The door was open. Neil was mid-slide, a projected timeline showing Halston breaking ground 2 months ahead of the board-approved schedule. Permits expedited. Financing restructured through a subsidiary Julia's name was not on. A parallel operation, built inside her own company, designed to move faster than her oversight could follow. Julia walked in and sat down in the back row. She did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She waited until Neil finished the slide, and then she asked 3 questions. Has the city issued the grading permit? Who signed the final geotechnical certification? Is the bonding company aware of the accelerated schedule? Neil answered none of them directly. He pivoted to projected returns, to investor confidence, to the phrase time-sensitive opportunity, used twice in 30 seconds. The 5 investors watched the exchange the way people watch a door they are considering walking back through. Julia did not press further. She stayed for the rest of the presentation, 22 minutes of slides she had never been shown, projections she had never approved, a construction timeline her board had never voted on. She took notes on her phone, her thumb moving in short, precise strokes. When the last slide went dark, she stood up, thanked the investors for their time, and walked out without looking at Neil. In the elevator afterward, she said, he's been running a parallel timeline. The board doesn't know. Her voice was level, but her jaw was set in a way Adam had not seen before. A hinge tightened 1 notch past comfortable. He said, how did you know something was off? She said, I didn't. You told me. He said, the seating chart. Nobody hides the boss unless they're planning something the boss wouldn't approve. Julia looked at him. For the first time since the gala began, she was not performing the version of herself that the room required. She was standing in an elevator with a man who had noticed what no one else in her company had bothered to point out. She said, thank you. He said, don't thank me yet. What neither of them knew was that the seating chart was the smallest thing Neil Carver had hidden, and what Adam would find by morning would make a side meeting look like a footnote. Adam did not sleep Saturday night. He lay in the hotel bed until 2 a.m., then gave up and sat down at the desk with his laptop. He logged into the Grayfield archive and downloaded the full 2020 geotechnical report, 64 pages, 3 appendices, signed and stamped on every certification page. His report, his numbers, his PE stamp in the lower right corner of each signature block. Then he opened the photographs he had taken of the gala display boards. He enlarged the foundation specifications and set them side by side with the original on the screen. Page 12. Soil-bearing capacity. The original listed 1,500 pounds per square foot at design depth, with a recommendation for driven steel piles to a minimum of 60 feet. The version on the display boards listed 2,200 pounds per square foot and specified piles at 42 feet. The difference was not a revision. It was a fabrication. 2,200 would pass a cursory review. 1,500 would have required a deeper, more expensive foundation, the kind of expense that turned a profitable project into a marginal one. Page 14. Lateral load analysis. The original included a caution flag for seismic liquefaction potential in the upper alluvial layer, standard for that part of Portland, mandatory to address in any foundation design within half a mile of the river. The version on the boards had no caution flag. The paragraph had been removed as cleanly as if it had never existed. Page 16. The original contained a full-page narrative warning, Adam's own language, written in 2020, reviewed by 2 senior engineers, about the risk of differential settlement if pile depth was reduced below 55 feet on the east side of the parcel. The warning cited soil borings, water table data, and a lateral load model that had taken his team 3 weeks to build. The version on the boards had deleted it entirely. In its place was a single summary sentence. No significant geotechnical constraints identified. Adam sat back. He scrolled to the PE stamp on the filed version. It was not his. The stamp belonged to David Falk, a junior engineer who had left Grayfield in 2021. Adam opened the Oregon Board of Examiners database on his phone. Falk's PE license had lapsed in March of 2023, 18 months before the Halston permit was filed. The stamp on the city's copy was from a credential that no longer existed, attached to a document that had been rewritten to say the opposite of what the original engineer had concluded. Neil Carver had not just altered a report. He had forged a professional certification and filed it with the city of Portland. Adam called a former colleague at Grayfield at 7 a.m. Sunday morning. The man picked up on the third ring, voice still rough with sleep. Adam read him the file number. There was a pause, then the sound of a laptop opening. The colleague pulled the original from Grayfield's archive, compared the hash against the version Adam described, and confirmed. The original assessment had never been revised, never superseded, never amended. The version on file with the city did not match their records. Nobody at Grayfield had been contacted about it. Nobody had been asked to update it. Nobody had been told a revised version existed. Adam thanked him and hung up. He sat at the desk for a moment, both hands flat on the surface, the way he stood at a railing when he needed to feel something solid under his palms. Then he went downstairs to the hotel business center and printed both versions. He marked the discrepancies on pages 12, 14, and 16 with a red pen. 3 circles, 3 arrows, 3 margin notes in his engineer's handwriting, small and precise and impossible to misread. He took the pages to the 4th floor, walked to Julia's door, and slid them underneath. On the back of the last page, he wrote, "Page 12, page 14, page 16. The original has my name on it." He was 6 steps from the elevator when the door opened behind him. Julia stood in the doorway holding the pages. She looked at the red marks first, then at him. She did not look surprised. She looked like a person who had been waiting for something to arrive and had just heard it land. She said, "Come in." Julia spread the pages across the desk, the original on the left, the filed version on the right, Adam's red marks connecting them like a map of something that had been broken on purpose. She read in silence for 11 minutes. Adam stood by the window and watched the Sunday morning emptiness of the Pearl District below, delivery trucks, joggers, and nothing else. She picked up her phone and called her general counsel. It was 7:40 on a Sunday morning, and she did not apologize for the hour. She said, "I need you on a call in 30 minutes. Bring the Halston permit file and the board resolution from March." By 8:15, 3 board members were on a conference line. Julia's hotel room became a situation room. Laptop open, both report versions displayed side by side. The general counsel on speaker pulling the city filing records in real time. Adam was not on the call, but Julia left the door to the sitting area open, and she did not ask him to leave. At 8:40, Neil Carver was added to the call. His voice came through the speaker with the controlled calm of a man who had rehearsed for this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Then he noticed Adam in the background of Julia's video feed. "You're making structural decisions based on input from a handyman," Neil said. "A handyman from Bend who showed up 3 days ago. I've been with this company for 9 years. Julia did not respond to that. She read the PE stamp number from the filed report aloud, 7 digits, the state prefix, the year of issuance. She asked Neil to confirm whose license it belonged to. She asked whether David Falk had authorized the use of his stamp. She asked whether Falk had even seen the revised document. Neil did not answer. The general counsel confirmed that Falk's license had been inactive since March of 2023. He also confirmed that the filing with the city bore a submission date of September 2024, 6 months after Falk's credential had expired. The board voted to suspend the Halston Tower project pending a full, independent geotechnical review. The vote was unanimous. Neil Carver was placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Building access credentials revoked by Monday morning. The general counsel said, "I'll have a referral to the Board of Examiners and the DA's office drafted by end of day." Julia ended the call. She closed the laptop and sat in the desk chair without moving for a long time. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heating unit and the faint sound of traffic on the street below. Adam stayed by the window. He gave her the silence the way you give someone a room, by not filling it. After a while, she said, "You saw it Friday night. The display boards. You knew then." He said, "I thought I knew. I wasn't sure." She said, "What's the difference?" He said, "I wanted to be right before I said something. Not just close." Julia looked at the 2 reports on the desk. She touched the edge of the original, his name on the cover sheet, his stamp on the signature page, his language in the warning paragraph that someone had deleted. She said, "A handyman from Bend." He said, "Yeah." She picked up the pages and put them in order, squaring the edges against the desk the way someone squares the edges of something they intend to keep. The closing brunch happened at 11 on the hotel mezzanine. White tablecloths, fruit platters, the particular brand of expensive casualness that Sunday brunches at industry events always carried. The Halston announcement was not on the agenda. Julia stood at the head of the room for less than 2 minutes. She said the Halston Tower project was under independent review. She said no construction timeline would be confirmed until the review was complete. She said it with the kind of calm that does not invite follow-up questions, and nobody asked any. Afterward, Adam and Julia walked along the Willamette. The river was gray and flat under the October cloud cover, the kind of light that made everything look like a photograph taken slightly out of focus. They walked the East Bank Esplanade past the floating walkway, past the steel bridge, past the point where the path curved south and the city noise fell away behind them. She asked why he left engineering. He told her. The department was cut. He was on bereavement leave. Nobody called him back. By the time the shock had dulled enough for him to think about a career, the career was gone. He said he could have fought it, grievance, contacts, a rebuilt network. He said he did not want to. She asked if he missed it. He said, I miss knowing what I built would hold. She was quiet for a few steps. Then she said, it held today. They kept walking. She told him she had known something was wrong with Halston for months. The numbers Neil presented never quite matched the permit filings. Small discrepancies she could sense, but not prove. She was a developer, not an engineer. She could read a balance sheet in the dark, but she did not have the technical vocabulary to challenge a geotechnical certification. She had been waiting for the right lever, and it had walked into her gala in a borrowed suit that did not fit at the shoulders. She said, the consulting offer is real. I need someone to lead the independent structural review. Someone whose name is already on the original report. He said, I'll think about it. She nodded. She did not push. They walked another quarter-mile without speaking, past a rowing crew cutting silent lines across the water, past a man throwing a ball for a dog that never got tired of bringing it back. The ordinary machinery of a Sunday, operating around them as if this weekend had been ordinary too. The drive back to Bend was 2.5 hours through the pass. Julia following in her rental, Adam in the Ranger, her headlights steady in his rear view the whole way. At the Bend exit, she turned toward her cabin and he turned toward home, and neither of them called that night. Some distances need to stay distances a little longer before they close. But what was waiting for both of them in Bend would prove that the weekend had only been the beginning. Adam pulled into his driveway at 8:40 on Sunday night. Jean's car was still in front of the house, the porch light on, the kitchen window yellow behind the curtains. Ben was on the porch with a paperback, sitting in the wooden chair Adam had built the previous summer. He looked up when the truck door closed and said, You're back early. Adam sat down next to him. The air smelled like pine and cold water, the way Bend always smelled after dark when the temperature dropped and the river scent came through the trees. Ben asked if Portland was good. Adam said, yeah, it was good. Ben nodded and went back to his book. He did not need more than that. He had learned, at 10, that his father gave answers at the speed he was ready to give them, and that pushing never changed the speed. Jean came out a minute later. She stood in the doorway and read Adam's face the way she had been reading it for 38 years, the set of his mouth, the position of his shoulders, the fact that he was sitting on the porch instead of going straight to bed. She said, You hungry? He said, No, I'm good. She kissed him on the head and drove home. Monday morning, Adam was back under a kitchen sink on Galveston Avenue, replacing a corroded shutoff valve for a retired couple who had been meaning to call a plumber for 6 months. He was on his back on the linoleum, pipe wrench in his right hand, when his phone buzzed. Julia's voice was different. Not the CEO voice from the brunch or the controlled voice from the board call. Something closer to the voice from the cabin deck in Bend. Unhurried, unguarded, the version that existed when nobody was evaluating her. She told him the board had formally terminated Neil Carver on Monday morning. The independent geotechnical firm had completed a preliminary review and confirmed that the original Grayfield report, Adams' report, was accurate. The altered version would have resulted in foundation failure within 18 months of occupancy. Differential settlement on the east side, exactly where Adam had flagged the risk for years ago. She said the consulting contract was drafted and ready. But that was not why she was calling. She said, I'm driving to Bend on Friday. Not for work. He was quiet for a moment, lying under a sink in a stranger's kitchen, holding a wrench in one hand and his phone in the other. Then he said, the railing's still holding. She did not say anything for a few seconds. Then she hung up, and he lay there on the linoleum looking at the underside of a cabinet, and he did not move for a while. Friday afternoon, a dark blue sedan pulled into Adam Calder's gravel driveway and stopped behind the Ranger. The engine cut. The door opened. Julia stepped out alone. No briefcase. No laptop bag. No phone in her hand. She had driven 2.5 hours from Portland, and she had brought nothing that belonged to a conference room. Adam was on the porch, finishing a joint on a chair leg he had been repairing since Wednesday. He had sanded it 3 times, which was 2 more than necessary, and he knew it. He set down the sandpaper and stood up. She walked across the gravel. Neither of them rushed. The distance between the car and the porch was 30 feet, and they let it take as long as it took. She sat down on the top step. He sat down next to her. The railing he had fixed 2.5 weeks ago was right there, solid, level, the cedar weathering into gray. She said, "The Halston site is being redesigned from the ground up. New geotechnical assessment, new structural team, new foundation design. I want it done right or not at all." He said, "That's a big reset." She said, "It's the only reset that means anything." She paused. "I want you to lead the structural review. Not as a favor. As a contract. Your PE is active. Your name is on the original report, and you're the only engineer I've met in 5 years who saw a problem and didn't calculate whether it was politically convenient to mention it." He looked at the railing. He ran his hand along the top rail. The cedar was smooth under his fingers, the joint tight, the seal holding. He said, "I'll consider it." She said, "That's fine." They sat there. The late afternoon light came through the pines at a low angle, the kind of October light that made the Cascade Range look closer than it was. A truck passed on Century Drive. A dog barked somewhere on the next block. The screen door opened. Ben stood there, one hand on the frame. He looked at Julia. She said, "Hi, Ben." He said, "Hi." He looked at his father, then back at Julia, and said, "You want water?" She said, "Sure." Ben went inside and came back with 3 glasses on a tray, the wooden tray Adam had made from leftover cedar the same week he built the porch chair. He set 1 glass in front of Julia without hesitation, 1 in front of Adam, and kept 1 for himself. Then he sat down on the bottom step, below both of them, and drank his water the way a kid drinks water when he has decided, without discussion, that the person sitting next to his father is allowed to be here. Julia asked Ben about his book. He was reading something about a kid who sailed alone across the Pacific. He told her it was okay, but the navigation parts were wrong. She asked how he knew. He said, "Dad showed me how to read a chart." She nodded like that was a normal thing a 10-year-old would know, and Ben seemed to approve of the fact that she did not make a big deal out of it. Adam listened. He did not interrupt. He watched Julia talk to his son the way he watched a joint he had just glued, to see if it would hold. It held. The 3 of them stayed on the porch as the afternoon turned to early evening and the light dropped behind the Cascades. The air turned cold enough to see breath, but nobody suggested going inside. Nobody checked a phone. The sounds were small. Ben turning a page, the creak of the porch step when Adam shifted his weight, the distant hum of a neighbor's garage door closing for the night. Julia's hand rested on the step between her and Adam, not reaching, just resting. His hand was next to hers. The distance between them was less than an inch, close enough that the gap was a choice, not an accident. He had spent 2 years fixing everything except the one thing that was actually broken. She had spent 5 years building everything except the one thing she actually needed. Neither of them had come looking, and maybe that was the only reason either of them stayed.